There should be 10 new jump-in packets for Phyrexia All Will Be One, as there have been for previous sets. So let's have a look at 5 of the new packets in detail and see what cards you could get in the jump-in events. Welcome back to Game School Dad with me, Martin. We're having a look at the jump-in events because with Phyrexia All Will Be One being released, there should be 10 new packets. But I haven't seen anything about it online. Wizards of the Coast apparently haven't made any announcements, and it seems kind of strange. So, I've had a look at some jump-in events. I've done 4 events, and out of those 4 events, I have found 5 of the new packets. All of the mono-coloured packets that exist, as far as I'm aware. So I'm going to have a look at those 5 different half packs that you can get from the events, and we'll go through the rares and all the other cards you can get from them and see how much these new jump-in cards are worth. But first of all, I just want to say a couple of things about jump-in events in general, because I haven't been able to make a video that goes into jump-in in huge detail so far. So first of all, I just want to cover, are jump-in events actually worth your 1000 gold? Well, for your entry fee, you can pick 2 half packs, and each of them have about 11 cards that you can play. Obviously, you get some lands mixed in as well, so you end up with a 40 card deck that you can play in against other jump-in decks. And out of those 11 cards, you can get 1 rare or mythic card, which I think sometimes changes. Like, there's a couple of different rares or mythics you can get, but it's slightly randomized. So as you get to pick 2 packs, that's at least 22 cards you're getting, where 2 of them are rares or mythics. So for 1000 gold, which you could buy 1 pack for 1000 gold, you're getting 2 rares or mythics and 20 other cards. And then if you win a game with that jump-in pack, you also get at least another uncommon card as a reward that could be upgraded to another rare or mythic, possibly. Compared to buying a pack, when you include the wildcard track bonus and the golden pack bonus that you get from buying a pack of the most recent set, you actually get about 1.8 worth of rares on average from buying a pack. 2 uncommons and 5 commons, although those can sometimes be turned into wildcards instead. So all in all, a pack is worth about 9 cards overall, and a jump-in event is worth 22. So obviously you're getting more cards from jump-in, and you get to kind of pick what you're going to get because you have 3 different options on one screen, and on next screen you get 3 different options again. So you can choose the colours you like, or if you look up the cards that are in the packs, you can kind of choose the cards you're getting as well. Also, when you're picking from your 3 packs, there is a kind of duplicate protection built in that it will always give you an option that you haven't chosen before, unless you've chosen every option there is. So if you haven't done many jump-in events before, when you go in to do a jump-in event now, you're going to have a whole huge range of different packs you could pick from previous sets, plus the 10 that we should get with Phyrexia. But if you've done lots of jump-in events before, and if you've picked every single packet at some point since the jump-in events were released, you are, in theory, guaranteed to have at least 1 new Phyrexia pack that you could pick when you go through your selection process. So there's definitely some benefit from choosing jump-in rather than just buying a pack, at least at the beginning of a set, because jump-in won't give you duplicate protection. If you already have 4 copies of a rare and you pick a jump-in pack that includes that rare, you're going to get some gems instead of getting a different rare card. If you buy a pack, when you have 4 copies of a rare, you won't get that rare again, you won't get gems. Unless you have all of the rares in the set, you'll get a rare that you don't have yet. So jump-in events are better to do near the beginning of a set, or when you don't have a huge collection, and buying packs are better towards the end of a set, or when you do have quite a big collection. So with that out of the way, as we're at the beginning of Phyrexia All Will Be One at the recording of this, it's definitely worth it to have a look at the jump-in events and see what's in there, because you might pick up some rares or some useful commons or uncommons that you won't pick up from getting packs, or it's a bit more randomized at least. So let's at least have a look at the packs that you could pick from jump-in for Phyrexia All Will Be One. Hopefully I can get all 10 of the new jump-in packs to show you what's in them, but today I've got the first 5, and I will include the deck lists in the description below so you can copy and paste them if you want to, and see if any of those are worth your gold. So let's jump in. First of all, we have the Science packet, which are an artifact, card draw, discard kind of synergy, and the rare card that I got in this one was Unctus, Grand Metatect. So this is a great card if you have an artifact creature tribal kind of deck, because this gives all other artifact creatures you control an extra +1/+1, and whenever they become tapped, you can draw a card and discard a card. So if you have the Teferi Planeswalker that adds loyalty counters when you draw cards, or any of those like Fairy Vandal or Doctor Architect cards that add an extra +1 counter when you draw an extra card, they might be a very good one to include with Unctus. And you can even use 1 blue mana or 2 life to turn a creature you control into a blue artifact. So if you have something else that isn't blue, or at the very least something else that isn't an artifact, you can pay that mana or pay that life to turn it into an artifact, which then also lets it gain the +1/+1 ability from Unctus. In the science packet, we also have Font of Progress, which is a milling card, which is okay if you can add more oil counters onto it to increase the rate that you're milling cards. Might be good in a Jace deck. Doesn't necessarily work great with the other ones in this packet. That's something I noticed. I've played this a few times and the cards don't necessarily work really well together because Unctus, we can draw a card and discard a card whenever our creature becomes tapped, but they also give us cards with vigilance, so they don't tap. So yeah, sometimes they don't necessarily work very well together. But yeah, Font of Progress, good for a milling strategy, possibly if milling is a good strategy these days with Jace and the other cards you can get that mill. But definitely better if you can add more oil counters onto it by proliferating, or any other way you can add counters from the other cards. I have Escaped Experiment, a 2/1 common for 2, which can reduce the attack damage, reduce the power of an opponent's creature based on number of artifacts you control. I guess that's good if the opponent only has 1 good creature to block, but otherwise it's not a great common. Malcator's Watcher is a good 1/1 flying vigilance, which can draw a card when it dies. It doesn't work with Unctus's tapping a card and drawing and discarding, but it's pretty good. It's worked quite well for me in Limited as well. Probably not one of the best cards, but it is a common. We also have Prophetic Prism, a 2 mana artifact that can draw a card for 2 and can help fix your mana if you're playing more than 1 colour in your deck. And nothing too amazing there. Eye of Malcator, an artifact that can scry 2, and whenever another artifact enters the battlefield under your control, become a 4/4 artifact creature, so you can hit for 4. Malcator obviously working better with the other Malcator card because that's an artifact creature as well. Only really useful if you have lots of artifacts entering so it can keep becoming a creature. Otherwise not an amazing card. Mysterious Tome. It's a slight mystery why this is even in here because this is from Midnight Hunt, so I'm not sure. Or maybe it's just because it's an artifact and it kind of works with the deck. I thought most of these decks would have been specifically cards from that set, but I guess there's a little bit of a mix sometimes. Again, not an amazing artifact. It's an uncommon. It can draw cards, it can tap creatures, it can flip between one and the other. It's okay, I guess. And we have Unctus's Retrofitter, a 2/3 Artificer card with Toxic 1. Can turn any other artifact you have into a 4/4 creature for as long as the Retrofitter remains on the battlefield. So I guess that works better with something like Font of Progress, could become a 4/4. Prophetic Prism could become a 4/4 if you're not going to use it for the other abilities, if you're not going to use it to add your mana, if you're not going to use this to mill, you could turn them into 4/4 creatures, which is pretty nice. Obviously, this could also work with other artifacts, so even Power Stones or Treasure Tokens could become 4/4 creatures, which is quite nice. Mesmerizing Dose is one of those basic tap the creature, stop it from untapping kind of enchantments. Also has the added benefit of being able to proliferate, which at least in this deck adds oil counters onto Font of Progress, but doesn't do much else with the blue. So again, it's good in the right deck where you want to proliferate lots of things. Not so good in a deck that doesn't benefit from proliferating. Then we have Transplant Theorist, which is a 2/4, which allows you to draw a card and discard a card, and you can put target cards from your graveyard onto the bottom of your library if you want to take them out of your graveyard. When would you want to use this? Well, maybe if you have a card that you want to stop the opponent from exiling from the graveyard, if you want to get it back into your library so you could search for it possibly. I'm not sure which cards you would specifically want to get back to the bottom of your library. Let me know if you can think of anything that would work really well with this. But again, it would work really well in general, drawing the card, discarding cards for any of those big blue card draw strategies. And our last blue creature is Quicksilver Fisher, a flying 4/3 for 5 mana, which again can draw a card and discard a card. So all of the different abilities and synergies in the science deck are drawing cards and discarding cards. So you need to have some kind of benefit, some kind of payout. You can do this a lot and it can help get rid of land flood, or it can help get rid of other things to get more land in. But if you're just drawing lots of cards that don't do very much, the science packet by itself isn't great, but again, can add to another deck that you might want to make using these cards. And now let's look at the green Venom pack, jump-in pack from Phyrexia All-Be-One. Have a look, where was our rare? Our rare for this pack is Bloated Contaminator, a 4/4 trample toxic 1. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, proliferate. So, although it's toxic 1, you can hit the opponent You put the poison counter on, and then you proliferate, and you basically get toxic 2, because you're adding another counter on. Obviously works really well with anything else that uses counters, or oil counters, any other toxic synergies. Being a trample means you've got a good chance of doing combat damage to the opponent. It only costs 3 mana, so it's a pretty good card to get out if you're using a green toxic style deck. And let's look at the other cards in the pack. We've got Rustvine Cultivator, a 1/2 that can tap to add an oil counter, and then tap again on another turn to remove an oil counter, untap target land. There's a way of ramping using counters. Maybe a bit slow, but I guess it's okay. Then we have Thirsting Roots, one of those 1 mana sorceries where you can search for a basic land, put it into your hand to help fix if you don't have too many lands in your hand at the time. You can also proliferate, which is good with the toxic synergies here. So not too bad, 1 mana, does some things. Nice to have a couple of options there. Then we have Branch Blight Stalker, a 3/1 toxic 2 for 2 mana. A nice way to get some toxic damage through. It's also an elf, if that helps. If you're using some kind of elf tribal strategy or drawing cards when elves enter the battlefield, you can start ramping up some toxic elves possibly. We have Copper Longlegs, a spider, 1/3 with reach, where you can sacrifice it and proliferate. So it's a shame you have to sacrifice it to proliferate, but I guess if the opponent's attacking you with a big creature, you could throw Copper Longlegs in front of it and then sacrifice it and proliferate and then avoid the damage as well. So a nice little trick just to get an extra proliferate in there. We have Infectious Bite, an instant you do damage equal to your creature's power to the opponent's creature. So a bite down effect, but this one's an Infectious Bite because the opponent also gets a poison counter. Is there any drawback to having this compared to having Bite Down? I don't think there is. In fact, if we compare it directly to Bite Down, we have literally exactly the same. It's an instant, it's 2 mana. Your creature does damage to an opponent's creature. This one just doesn't do anything extra, so I guess Infectious Bite has that little extra of giving a poison counter, which works well with the proliferate, works well with other toxic. It also might help you get to Corrupted, giving the opponent 3 poison counters and getting some extra benefits from other abilities. So yeah, why not include that instead of Bite Down? Sure, sounds good. Bloated Contaminator I like, but I've already gone through that. 4/4 toxic 1 trample. Proliferates every turn when it does damage to the opponent, which is nice. Maze's Mantle is a 3 mana enchantment, a flash enchantment, which can give your creature +2/+2, and if it happens to have toxic as well, it can get hexproof till end of turn. So one way to protect your Bloated Contaminators or any of your other toxic creatures here. A nice little trick for a toxic deck. Viral Spawning, a 3 mana 3/3 green Phyrexian beast with toxic 1 effectively, and Corrupted. If your opponent has 3 poison counters or more, you can cast it again for 3 mana from the graveyard, so an extra card, basically an extra creature with toxic. You can get Corrupted pretty easily, I guess, with Infectious Bite or with cards with Proliferate. That seems pretty nice for an uncommon. Might work really well in a budget deck for green toxic creatures. Then we have Venomous Brutalizer, 4 mana 4/4 toxic 3. When it enters, you can pay an extra 2 mana to proliferate. Again, it's okay. Would be nice if it had trample or something else, but it's okay for an uncommon creature. And then we have Tyrannax Atrocity, a 5 mana 4/4 haste toxic 3. So almost the same as Brutalizer, 1 mana more for that extra haste. And then we have Paladin of Predation, an uncommon, 7 mana 6/7 toxic 6, and cannot be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. So I like the look of this. I like the fact it's toxic 6 because if the opponent can't block it, you're hitting for 6 poison counters to start with any other Infectious Bite or Proliferate kind of tricks. You could be getting to 10 poison counters pretty easily, but it's 7 mana, and I reckon there's probably better things you could cast for 7 mana, but at least this is just an uncommon, so it's not too expensive to get hold of. So there's some things in the Venom pack: Bloated Contaminator, Infectious Bite, maybe Maze's Mantle as well as a nice little hexproof trick that might work really well in a green toxic, or at least a green corrupted, maybe with some black or some white as well, to make those corrupted abilities work better. Maybe a deck like that, this will work quite well. Here is one of the black jump-in new packs from Phyrexia, Cutthroat, and this pack has a good number of synergies of when your creatures die or bringing your creatures back from the graveyard. The rare we get in this pack is Vran Executioner Thane, which is a legendary Phyrexian vampire, a 2/2 for 2. Whenever one or more other creatures you control die, each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life, but it's only once per turn. So a nice vampire draining ability that can keep us alive a bit longer and maybe take out some more life of the opponent, hopefully drain him down to 0 if we can. Other cards we have in this deck are Annihilating Glare, a sorcery, 1 mana, you can destroy a target creature or planeswalker if you sacrifice one of your creatures, or pay an extra 4 to destroy them instead, so that costs 5 to get rid of something. If you have artifacts or creatures that you want to sacrifice in order to get rid of the opponent, then 1 mana is pretty good for killing those things, 5 mana not so great. We have Persistent Specimen, which is actually from the Crimson Vow set, but at least it's a creature that you can sacrifice and return to the battlefield again if you want to use it. So it works pretty well in this deck. Also have Vat of Rebirth, an artifact that whenever another artifact or creature you control is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, you put an oil counter on it, and you can tap it for 3 mana, remove 4 oil counters from the vat, and return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield as a sorcery. So if you've got some big black creature in your graveyard, maybe you mill it, maybe you discard it, bring that back. All you need is 4 creatures or artifacts to be removed. And for 3 mana you can bring something out, not too bad. It can work well in the right deck, I suppose. We have Blight Belly Rat. This works really well in Limited. Does it work in Constructed? Maybe not so well. Toxic 1. Okay, that works if we've got Corrupted, because we're not going to be able to get 10 poison counters on the opponent with this. To be honest, if we could hit them 10 times with this, we're doing 20 damage anyway. The Toxic 1 isn't a huge benefit unless we have Corrupted, which nothing in this actual packet uses Corrupted for, so Toxic itself isn't that great. So Blight Belly Rat you might want to include into a Corrupted deck that uses black and maybe green or white as well. Especially something that uses other counters, because you can proliferate when it dies. We have Drown in Ichor, a 2 mana target creature gets -4/-4 till end of turn, and proliferate to 2 mana removal effectively. Pretty much the majority of cards. Yes, there are some things that won't die with that, but with the added ability of being able to proliferate, if you're using counters, this could work pretty well for you. We have Cutthroat Centurion, a 3 mana 2/2. You can sacrifice another artifact or creature, and you can give Cutthroat Centurion a +2/+2 till end of turn. So, trick, you can sacrifice something like Persistent Specimen that you don't really care if it goes. Get +2/+2 as a trick. Nothing hugely amazing, a 3 mana 2/2, not too exciting. We have Stinging Hive Master, a 3 mana 3/2 Toxic 1. When it dies, create a 1/1 Might with Toxic 1 as well. Again, might work well in a Corrupted deck or something with lots of other toxic things in. This in itself, I guess at least if it dies, you have another Might you could sacrifice for something. Then we have Necrosquito. Actually, I quite like this one. It's a 4 mana flying 0/0, but it enters with 2 oil counters and gets +1/+1 for each oil counter on it. And whenever another creature or artifact you control is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, you put another oil counter on Necrosquito. So basically, every time something dies of yours, goes into your graveyard, you get an extra +1/+1 counter on Necrosquito. It's flying as well, which I guess that helps. If you have other oil counter synergies in the deck, this will work pretty well. Obviously, we also have, where is it? Proliferate in some things. Drown in Ichor gives you Proliferate as well. Also, we have Proliferate synergies. Drown in Ichor gives you Proliferate when you destroy a creature. So again, you can grow Necrosquito. You get another +1 for the oil counter on it. And then we have Testament Bearer, 4 mana 4/1. When it dies, look at the top 3 cards of your library, put 1 into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. It dies really easily with 1 toughness. So you're kind of expecting it to die, but it's just a common anyway. So yeah. Then we have Vat Emergence, a 5 mana sorcery. Put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control and proliferate. The only thing that makes this particularly exciting is you're not just looking at the creatures in your graveyard, you're looking at things in your opponent's graveyard as well, putting anything from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. So if we can just destroy something with Annihilating Glare or any other removal spell, especially if it's a really big thing, we can basically get it back for 5 mana, takes it out of their graveyard. And this works particularly well with something like a Phyrexian Flesh Gorger that will come back as a particularly big creature, or something like a Cityscape Leveler with Unearth that the opponent is probably planning on unearthing at some point, and attacking again with that. You can put that from the battlefield to your control, and then they can't do that. So can these cards work pretty well? Yes, again, in a constructed deck where you've got the proper synergies going on here, a lot of these comments aren't particularly great, but they do just add to your collection if you're trying to build up your collection as quickly as possible. I feel like this deck in particular would work better if there were other big creatures you really wanted to return from the graveyard. But at the moment, with Vat of Rebirth, getting something from your graveyard, or Vat Emergence, getting something from either graveyard, what's the best thing we can bring back for 5 mana? Testament Bearer, Necrosquito, Singing Hive Master. Nothing too exciting. There's no big things we can bring back. So in a deck with some other big creatures, maybe even Titan of Industry or anything else with a good enter the battlefield ability, maybe we'd want to do that. There's probably other cards that work better for this. So Cutthroat isn't the most exciting jump-in deck that I've seen. But let me know if you think maybe some of these cards are better than I think they are. Maybe they can be used in other decks really well. Let me know in the comments. This is the white. This is the first white jump-in deck I've seen for Phyrexia All-Be-One, and the rare we have here in this complete one is Norn's Wellspring, and 1 spring, a 2-mana artifact, which is rare. Whenever a creature you control dies, you scry 1 and put an oil counter on Norn's Wellspring, and you can tap it and pay 1 mana to remove 2 oil counters from Norn's Wellspring to draw a card. So obviously very good for when you have creatures that die. You can scry, you can start drawing more cards for 1 mana return, which is pretty good. But obviously only works better in decks where we have lots of things that are going to die and we're okay with them dying. Let's see how this works out in this deck. First of all, we have Sinew Dancer, a 1 mana 1/1 that can tap target creature for 4 mana, or if you have Corrupted, can tap a target creature for 1 mana. And only, so Corrupted only if they have 3 or more poison counters. Do we have poison counters in this deck? Let's see. Corrupted. We do have Toxic 1 Double Strike, which is quite nice. Toxic 1, Toxic 1, Toxic 1. Yeah, we have a few little ways of creating mites that can make toxic, which is pretty good. So yeah, we can get Corrupted. 1 mana, we can tap the opponent's biggest thing, which is nice. We have Complete Devotion, a 2 mana instant that gives a target creature +2/+2 till end of turn. If it has Toxic, we also draw a card, which is not too bad for a 2 mana instant combat trick. So common. Nice thing to have there, maybe. Incisor Glider, a 2 mana 1/3 flying, Corrupted. Whenever Incisor Glider attacks, if an opponent has 3 or more poison counters, creatures you control get +1/+1 till end of turn. Works really well if you have lots of creatures. So if we're making lots of tokens, lots of might tokens, and we attack and the opponent has 3 poison counters, everything gets +1/+1. So we're hitting with lots of creatures that aren't 1/1s, they're 2/2s or bigger. If we have a few Incisor Gliders, obviously they stack and they work really well together. But in these jump-in packs, we only get 1 of each. So getting 1 of those, not too bad for a deck like that. This would be pretty good maybe in a deck with more Incisor Gliders, so we can stack those +1/+1s. We have Jawbone Duelist, a 2 mana 1/1 Double Strike Toxic 1. So double strike, meaning we're going to hit twice. Toxic will do a poison counter, add a poison counter whenever we do damage. So we're basically getting Toxic 2 here. We're adding 2 poison counters on if Jawbone Duelist happens to hit the opponent and get that double strike damage in as well. That's nice. Nice little uncommon there. We have Ossification. I quite like this one. It's a 2 mana enchantment, an aura that attaches to one of your own basic lands, which is kind of unique, I think. And you can exile target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls. So it's kind of a borrowed time, but it's a bit cheaper. But it's only creatures or planeswalkers, so not other enchantments, not other artifacts. But for only 2 mana, and it attaches to your basic land, I think that's pretty good. Obviously, you don't want to play this in a deck where you have no basic lands or very few basic lands, because it's going to mean you have less opportunity to actually use it. But in a deck where you have a normal number of basic lands in there, not bad for a 2 mana, remove any creature or planeswalker, especially considering we have 10 new planeswalkers in the Phyrexia set. So I would definitely include that in any enchantment deck you have, in these Selesnya enchantment decks. I think are really good. Yes, Ossification for 2 mana or 1 mana if you have a Jukai Naturalist or something out that makes enchantments cost less. Yeah, I think this works pretty well. I'm quite happy to have one of these. I think it will fit in lots of different decks. And let's not forget, if you happen to have Elesh Norn, this is entering the battlefield. It's causing itself to trigger its ability. So with Elesh Norn, you can exile 2 creatures or planeswalkers with this. Am I wrong? I don't think so. So this makes this card twice as good. I really like this card. And I can't wait to use it in an Elesh Norn deck very soon. We have Annex Sentry, a 3 mana 1/4 Toxic 1. When it enters the battlefield, exile target artifact or creature an opponent controls with mana value 3 or less until it leaves the battlefield. That's a bit like a Brutal Cathar. It can exile something and take it out, but only if it's mana value 3 or less. It's also an artifact and a cleric, so if those types work well in a deck that you're using, maybe Annex Sentry is a good include instead of Brutal Cathar. Maybe there's sometimes you'd want to use this rather than Brutal Cathar. I guess it's slightly harder to kill because it's got 4 toughness. Also has the added ability of Toxic, so if that works for you, then sure, include this one in your deck. And we have Flensing Raptor, a 3 mana 2/2 flying Toxic 1. When it enters, another target creature you control with Toxic gets +1/+1 and it's flying till end of turn. So gives a nice bit of evasion and an extra power and toughness boost. Obviously you need other creatures with Toxic for this to actually do anything. But yeah, entering the battlefield, don't forget Elesh Norn, entering the battlefield, give another creature with Toxic flying and +1, not too bad. Then we have Indoctrination Attendant, a 4 mana 3/4 Toxic 1. When it enters, you can return another permanent you control to its owner's hand. If you do, create a 1/1 Colors Phyrexian Might with Toxic 1. So more ETB abilities, enter the battlefield abilities. Again, Elesh Norn, I keep thinking of Elesh Norn with this deck because it's white and there's so many enter the battlefield abilities. But you could return 2 creatures to your hand, create 2 1/1 mites that have toxic, and then depending on what creatures you return to your hand, that's extra enter the battlefield abilities you get to use. So maybe Fencing Raptor, you can send that back to your hand, put it out again, give other things flying, and +1/+1. Annex Sentry, maybe if you've exiled an opponent's token, you could then bring it back to your hand and put it out again. You wouldn't want to do it if you've exiled something of the opponent's which is going to end up back on the battlefield on their turn. But if it's a token, you could do that and you're not losing anything. So it's okay. Probably better if you have other bigger things that have more impressive enter the battlefield abilities on them. But again, another way to make some mites, get some more toxic damage in there. And then we have Porcelain Zealot. At the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature you control gets +1/+1 till end of turn. If that creature has toxic, it gets +2/+2 instead. It's a 4 mana 2/3, which isn't a great body, isn't great stats to start with, but every one of your turns you could possibly give another creature with toxic +2/+2. I guess it works well with Jawbone Duelist, something with double strike. Obviously that +2/+2 is going to be doubled. So yeah, in the right case, get the right things out, it could really snowball and become pretty good. But these jump-in packs don't necessarily have the best synergies in them, but it's nice to add them to our collection. And then we have Basilica Shepherd at the end here, 5 mana 3/3, which isn't great. Phyrexian Angel, if Angel works well for you. It's flying. When it enters, create 2 more colorless mites. So it's okay by itself, nothing too amazing. If it's in an Angel tribal deck, maybe with Gyada Font of Hope, it's getting counters on it. Maybe with Elesh Norn and Mondrak, the white creature that adds double the token creatures whenever you create tokens. I guess if you have those 2 out and put out Basilica Shepherd, you're then making 8 1/1 mites, I suppose. So yes, that can work really well if you have the right other cards out. By itself, nothing hugely amazing. So that's the end of the complete white jump-in Phyrexia deck, which is okay. Yes, there's some cards in here I'd really like to use. Norn's Wellspring would work really well with all these mites you're making. If they're going to die, you can scry, you can draw more cards. You can remove the opponent's things with Ossification very well. This whole deck looks like it would work pretty well with Elesh Norn or Mondrak, the white Dominus card. Possibly you're going to get Corrupted at the very least. 3 poison counters on the opponent with all these mites you're making. And if you get enough of these creatures out, enough of these mites, and you have Corrupted, Incisor Glider might help you push through the last damage. I don't think you're going to get 10 poison counters on the opponent very easily with this, but 3 at least for Corrupted. Yeah, I think you could do that with this. And this is a red jump-in pack for Phyrexia All We Want. This is the oily pack. So red creatures that add oil counters onto them, benefit from oil counters, and proliferate as well. The rare we have in this pack is Urobosk's Forge. It's 3 mana artifact. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put an oil counter on the Forge and create a X1 red Phyrexian horror creature token with trample and haste, where X is the number of oil counters on the Forge. Sacrifice the token at the beginning of the next end step. So first time it comes out, you play this on turn 3, you make a 1/1 horror with trample and haste. Trample doesn't make a difference here, but if we can proliferate, add more counters onto the Forge, that helps. At the very least, we have a 1/1 that attacks and can be sacrificed. If you have a black and red sacrifice synergy going on here. On turn 4, you're making a 2/1 that can attack straight away or be sacrificed for something else. Next turn, a 3/1 trample haste keeps attacking. So the longer this is out, the more you're going to benefit from this. It's not a very fast red aggro kind of thing, but something that builds up, proliferates, and gets stronger and stronger. Yes, this could work pretty well. Let's have a look at the other cards in the pack. We have Churning Reservoir, a 1 mana artifact. At the beginning of your upkeep, you put an oil counter on another target non-token artifact or creature you control, so you could put those onto the Forge. You can also tap it and pay 2 mana to create a 1/1 Phyrexian Goblin token creature, which you can only activate if an oil counter was removed from a permanent you controlled this turn, or a permanent with an oil counter on it was put into the graveyard this turn. So if you have other synergies that will take oil counters off, or you're sacrificing creatures with oil counters on, you can make some 1/1s. It's cost 2 mana, so not terribly exciting. I think the main benefit of this card is being able to add oil counters onto anything else at the beginning of your upkeep on every turn. We have Exuberant Fuseling, a 1 mana 0/1 trample, but gets +1/+0 for each oil counter on it when it enters, and whenever another creature artifact you control is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, you put another oil counter on it. So if you have this creature out and you are making the Phyrexian Horror creature tokens with the Forge, every time they die, you get another oil counter added onto the Fuseling, and it gets another +1 on it, so it's going to start snowballing, getting bigger. Then we've got Axiom Engraver, a 2-mana 1/3. When it enters the battlefield, with 2 oil counters on it, you can remove one of those to discard a card and draw a card. The 1/3, it can block. It's not great for attacking, but it can help you fix your hand if you want to pick out the right things, get rid of some extra lands, or find the lands that you're looking for. Blazing Crescendo, this is a really nice trick, a 2-mana instant. It gives a creature +3/+1 till end of turn, and also exiles top card of your library. Until the end of your next turn, you may play that card. This might work really well in a mono-red aggro style deck. It gives you +3, which is a nice big attack, especially on a Monastery Swiftspear or a Festival Crasher. Also, effectively drawing another card, which you can play next turn. If all your spells are pretty small, guarantee you've got a good chance of being able to play that. Or if it's a land, it helps you bring your lands out. So it's really good. Don't know if it works so well in this kind of slow rolling deck, but I guess you could add +3 onto a creature with Trample, which is pretty nice. Then we've got Shrapnel Slinger, a 2-mana 2/2. When it enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice a creature. When you do, destroy target artifact an opponent controls. So if we have things we don't mind destroying, maybe we've made a goblin with the Reservoir, or maybe we've made a horror creature with the Forge, we could put out Shrapnel Slinger, sacrifice that creature if it's not going to do much for us, and destroy a target artifact an opponent controls. Now if they've got artifact creatures like this, or lots of artifact creatures, we have the prototypes and everything in the other Brothers War set and other sets. Sure, get rid of a Bankbuster, get rid of some other artifact creatures. Not too bad. Only when it enters the battlefield, so you only get it once. It's okay. We've got Coldotha Cackler, a 3-mana 2/3 Trample. When it attacks, it gets +X/+0 until end of turn, where X is the number of permanents you control with oil counters on them. So what do we have? We have Fuseling has oil counters. We have the Forge has oil counters. The Engraver has oil counters as well, and also the Strider at the end here has oil counters. So yes, it can grow from its 2/3 trample to something 4 or 5/3 maybe. Works really well with that oil synergy. Then we've got Magmatic Sprinter, 3-mana 2/3 haste, which I quite like this one. It enters the battlefield, you put 2 oil counters onto any other target artifact or creature, or you could put it onto the Sprinter itself. Beginning of your end step, return it to your hand unless you remove 2 oil counters from it. So you can play it out, you can attack, you can put the 2 oil counters on it, you can keep it for your next turn, but then on the next turn it won't have the oil counters on it, so then you'd have to bring it back to your hand again. Maybe it works better putting the 2 oil counters on something else, like onto the Forge maybe, and start making bigger trample creatures with the Forge. Then we have Volt Charge, a 3-mana 3 damage to any target, which is nice. It's got Proliferate, so you're going to add lots of oil counters onto things again. We've got Urabrask's Anointer, a 4-mana 4/2 Phyrexian Wizard. When it enters the battlefield, deals X damage to any target, where X is a number of permanents you control with oil counters on them. So we've got lots of oil counters going around here. With the Sprinter, we can add oil counters onto pretty much anything we have here. So yes, we can do lots of damage when we put this out, which is nice. And then we have a 5-mana Furnace Strider, 4/5, enters the battlefield with 2 oil counters on it again. We can remove an oil counter, and target creature we control gains haste till end of turn. Do we have anything big here that we'd want to give haste to? Maybe not necessarily. Maybe if we have Furnace Strider out and we get out a Cackler and we have lots of other oil counters on other things, we can give the Cackler haste. That can attack straight away. Maybe we can push through lots of damage at the end. Seems to work really well. We've got most of its oil counters. Obviously the card packet's called Oily, so that makes sense. Which does work really well with blue, with green. Also works with black and a couple of white cards as well, and some colorless. So it's nice to be able to mix this with maybe other colors as well. I'm sure there's lots of places you can use oil counters and other abilities that might say number of modified creatures you control, because the oil counters are modifications just like other counters. So it'd be interesting where we can use these in other decks. Also, if you have something like Mechanized Warfare, you're doing more damage. Every time you do any damage with any of these things, you're doing 1 extra damage. So your Volt Charge and your Trample creatures and everything else we have here can do more with Mechanized Warfare, other cards like that. Maybe that would be a card that you'd add to a deck like this and to upgrade it and to use that in other constructed decks. What do you think of the cards? Do you think there are any particular good ones in there? Do you think they're a waste of time? Do you think they're a good use of your gold? I'd love to know what you think. Hopefully in a future video I will be able to show you the other 5 packs. There should be 5 2-color packs that you can pick. And I believe the 2-color combinations for the jump-in events should be white and black, blue and red, green and blue, black and blue, and white and red. But I will confirm that in a future video once I found them. Maybe I'll do some more jump-ins now, but I am supposed to be saving my gold for the quick drafts, but maybe I'll have to sacrifice some of my collection for the sake of getting these jump-in events done and finding those packs for you. Maybe I'll have to do that this time. So I hope that was useful for you. Let me know if it was, and don't forget you can like this video and subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss out on any future Magic Arena content. And thank you for watching this video to the end. I will see you in the next one.